Hi folks, welcome back. Jonny Matthew here. Welcome to this latest episode in our series of chapter summaries from my new book, Working with Troubled Children and Teenagers. It's great to have you here. This is number 7 today. The previous ones we did 2 looking at trust, 1 about respect. Then we looked at our motivations for doing the work, our expectations from the work. And then last one that we did was about listening and how to do that effectively. So today, the title for our chapter summary is Giving. And really this is about giving ourselves into the process. So in the book, I break this down into a few chunks, but there's 4 I want to allude to today. One is looking at the nuts and bolts. One is called The Monkey is Never Enough. And then there's some stuff about being honest. And then finishing off with this idea of using ourselves, as an instrument of change in the lives of children and young people. So we'll just take those in turn now and see where that takes us. So the first idea is this idea of nuts and bolts. And what I'm getting at really here is that our job is more than the sum of the tasks that we do. Now, we all do this work, this difficult and challenging work, because we believe in it and because we probably feel called to it and we put our heart and soul into it. I don't think any of us would argue with that. But I think it's important to emphasize and underline that actually what we do is more than just what we do. That there's something qualitative about the way we do it and the investment of ourselves in that process, which is important. I remember my dad telling me about a job that he had many years ago in an engineering company, and it was a Saturday job or a summer job, and he was a student. And he describes himself as sitting on a stool and being surrounded by 4 sacks. And in the first sack there were some bolts, in the second sack there was some washers, and in the third sack there was some nuts, and then there was an empty 4th sack. And his job consisted of taking a bolt out of the first sack, putting 2 washers on it from the second stack, and then putting a nut on it from the third sack, and then putting the finished nut washers and bolts into the 4th sack. That was the job. It's enough to drive you nuts, isn't it? But assembling nuts and bolts and washers, that was the job. And essentially, he was processing bits. Now, our job is so much more than processing, because we're dealing with children, we're dealing with people broadly, but specifically with children, and even more specifically with children whose journey so far through life has been extremely difficult. So it's much more than just processing, that there's something innately and inherently human about our work. That I think we need to acknowledge right at the outset. That's really important. And that kind of brings us on to this second bit that called The Monkey Isn't Enough. And that's alluding to this idea we talk about, do we give a monkeys? And that to do our job effectively and to do it very well, we absolutely have to really care about these kids that we're looking after and that we're trying to help. Now, we've already said at the beginning that we do care. That's why we do this job. But what I'm saying here is that if we're going to give ourselves into the process, we do actually have to communicate that care. And to do that, I think takes a little bit of thought. But it also, I think, means that we can usefully, deliberately go the extra mile. So do the bit over and beyond what it's our job to do, because we care, and not just to kind of an expression of our altruism just for the sake of it, but to actually go out of our way to communicate that this isn't just a job for me. This is a belief in you as another human being, and my respect for you and my desire to see you succeed and things like that. So I remember a young man that I was case managing as a social worker for years ago, who was in residential care, and going up on a Sunday afternoon because it was Easter Sunday, and I knew wasn't going to be going home like the rest of the kids, and wasn't going to have a family visit like one or two of the kids that were remaining, and he might well be on his own in the residential unit. So after I'd got home from church in the morning and had my dinner, I went to the shop, bought a couple of Easter eggs, and took a ride up the road. It was only 20 minutes or so up the road from where I was living at the time, and visited him in the residential unit on a Sunday afternoon. And he was being a little bit difficult. Staff were a little bit frustrated, and they said, oh, he's outside. And when I went outside, he was making tennis ball sized lumps of mud and throwing them at the side of the building, and he'd covered quite a bit of the side of the building with mud, and he was just obviously agitated and quite angry and about his situation and the fact that he wasn't seeing his family. So I went out to where he was and just said, hi mate, how you doing? And he kind of looked at me and did that, well, it's Sunday, so why are you here kind of thing. And I said, well, it's Easter, and I thought you might want a couple of Easter eggs. And I gave him the carrier bag with the Easter eggs in it. Well, he was gobsmacked, actually. More so than I'd anticipated he was. I thought he might slough it off because he's too cool for school, and he wouldn't want to show me that he was delighted. But he was delighted, and he shouted at the top of his voice, "Oh, what kind of an effing social worker have I got?" It was just a little thing. It probably took 45 minutes out of my Sunday afternoon, but it was really important to him. So it's about thinking about the little things we can do quite easily that will communicate, will give something of ourselves into the process and communicates that we care. This is more than a job to us. We're not just processing nuts and bolts here. This is about people, and that matters. So that was about giving the monkeys isn't enough. It's crucial, harping back to what we said in previous episodes about our motivation. But we have to go out of our way to communicate the fact that it is more than that for us. I think another thing that we can do is this idea about being honest, that it costs us to be honest. Sometimes it's easier not to be honest with kids. I was in a conversation some months back with a childcare professional who was involved in a case, and a girl had been told that she was going to need to move placements. She was in a residential placement and was due to either go into foster care or a long-term residential placement. And she'd been told that where she was currently living was short-term and she'd be moving on soon. And the message kept coming back, you'll be moving on soon, you'll be moving on soon. But then behind the scenes, there were a number of meetings going on that were saying, well, actually, we've got no placements, we need to keep her here for a bit. She might actually need to stay here in the longer term. But the message to her is you're moving soon. And there's this real sense of mixed messages going on. She was getting increasingly agitated, was starting to, detach from where she was staying. She wasn't very invested in it. She wasn't building relationships with staff because she was moving soon. In actual fact, behind the scenes, there was a kind of resignation that she probably wouldn't move. But because there was also an assumption that she wanted to move, nobody was grasping the nettle and saying, listen, we can't find any placements. You're going to have to stay here for the meantime, so let's make this work. That would have been the honest message. And actually, I was involved in a case consultation meeting, and the message was, do you know what? Somebody needs to sit with this young lady and say, we've tried, we're unable to find another placement that's suitable, but you know what? This is actually quite a good placement. Why don't you just stay here? And if at some point in the future another placement is indicated, then we'll do that. But for now, you'll be staying here. It was like bursting that bubble of agitation and expectation and anticipation of moving. And the case very quickly quietened down, her behaviour settled, and she began to invest in staff. It was a simple thing, but it's so often something that's missed, either because we're anxious about upsetting the child or we're uncertain about how to be honest in a safe and appropriate way, that we don't grasp the nettle and really go for it. I think being honest is important in that kind of way, in the things we say. I think it's also important to be honest in the way that we feel. We forget that these kids are very astute, that they can read us to some degree, and the better they know us, the more easily and more accurately they can read us. So if they ask us how we are, if we slough that off with a kind of, yeah, fine, thanks, that may be true, but if it isn't true and we say it anyway, they'll know. And I think it's okay for us to say, well, do you know what? I've had a rough couple of weeks and my head's in the shed a bit at the moment, so forgive me if I'm not, my normal self. But you know what? We'll make this work. That's an honest answer. And I think we need to be honest about that and being honest in the little things. I had a situation many years ago with a young man who asked me straight up, and I deal with this in more detail in the book. He asked me straight up about, well, what do you know? What bad thing has ever happened in your life? And I thought, not out of reaction, but I thought, do you know what? That's a really good question. And I need to honour that question with an honest answer. And in a sense, that's what honesty is. It's an honouring of a proper question, of a good question. And so I said to him, well, do you know what? I haven't had your life and I haven't suffered the things that you've suffered. So I don't know about, do you know what? Not everything is smooth sailing for me. And actually, about a year or so ago, my wife and I, at the time, we lost a baby to miscarriage. And I found that really, really difficult. And in fact, you know what? There were times when I thought, I'm not sure if I can carry on. It was really hard. Now, it's different to your situation, but I think you kind of need to know that stuff happens for the rest of us as well, and it can be really tricky to deal with. Now, if the alarm bells are going off in your head, that's inappropriate disclosure. Stick around for the end of the video because I'm going to talk about caveats in a minute. But I think it's okay if we do it for the good of the young person in a way that is not working out our own stuff. I think it's okay to be honest with kids. Sometimes, probably quite rarely, but sometimes in the bigger stuff as well as in the everyday little stuff. And then I think we need to give into the relationship with children and young people what I've called froth in the book. It's that stuff which is just the human side of us. It's froth in that it's not the main thing. The main thing is our role. The main thing is our professional duty. The main thing is our relationship with the child in as much as it helps them. But I think sometimes it's good for us just to be people and to share some of that basic people stuff of who we are, sharing our sense of humour, making fun of our own kind of idiosyncrasies and characteristics, and making light of who we are, sharing what's happening in our lives, just that off-the-cuff stuff. The stuff that humanises us, takes us down off that kind of powerful, separated, professional kind of plane and brings us into the here and now to a place that's more relatable for the child involved. So I think we can be honest in our speech, we can be honest in how we feel, and we can be honest by sharing some of that more light-hearted but pretty basic human stuff, so they get a sense of this is a personal thing between two people, not just a professional and a client or a service user. God, I hate those terms. So nuts and bolts, the monkey isn't enough, being honest. And then lastly, it's this idea that I guess as by way of summary is that if we believe in relational working, and that's the only way to help these kids really, then it's necessary that we see ourselves as a key instrument of change in the young person's life. Those of you who know about the trauma recovery model and trauma recovery model training will be aware that we make much in those bottom layers of the triangular model of the need for relationship as a stabilizing influence in kids' lives. Really important that. So I think using self as an instrument of change is crucial, and it's something we should follow through on, bring to mind often, and think about how am I being with this young person in such a way as to help them to be better themselves and to do better and get better themselves. So those are the four areas. Just to say some important caveats. Our relationship and our working with troubled children and teenagers is never about working out our stuff. So in giving ourselves into the relationship and into that partnership that we have with them, that's never for our good. And if there's even a doubt that we are sharing something or feeling inclined to share something, if we're being honest about something or saying something about our feelings and how we are, because it will do us good, then that should caution us against that. And if there's any caution, we should err on the safe side and be professional. I guess what I'm saying though is that in as much as we can keep our own baggage out of it, we need to share our humanity and be relatable people for kids to get a handle on, so that they can connect with us at some kind of essential human level that takes it beyond a professional setting and starts to look more like a family type or a quasi-parenting type relationship. And I think that's important. So the caveats matter. It's not about us, it's about them. If we have any doubt at all, we'd probably better not to share and put the brakes on and go away and reflect on it first, think about it, and then come back to it if we think it's appropriate. But that it's important that we put ourselves into the process. If we are giving, really the most essential thing to give is ourselves. Going the extra mile, seeing this as an investment in a relationship, being honest in what we say, about what we feel, and who we are as human beings, so that we can properly use ourselves as instruments of change. So that's it. Number 7, giving. So thanks for being here. Please, if you're interested or you want to know more, nip over onto johnnymatthew.com/book, where you can find details about the book. You can read the introduction for nothing there. You can see the contents of the book, so you can have a dig around in that, and you can order it if you want. Also, if you want to get some audio versions of the blog posts, which are up on the blog, you can go over onto the Jonny 24/7 page on the blog. Just put johnnymatthew.com/Jonny247 24/7, and that'll take you to a page that explains how you can get more video and more audio over and above the blog. Anyway, thanks for being here. We'll be back next time for another soundbite. In the meantime, look after yourselves. You can only do for the kids what you do for yourself, so be well, stay well, hang in there and keep going, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Cheers.